I want to apologize in advance because this one turned out a lot weirder and more chaotic than I anticipated, but I guess that's what happens when someone has already seen most of my go-to recommendations. Your four favorites are Twin Peaks: The Return, The Beast, Eyes Wide Shut, and Cure. When I first glanced at this four favorites, there was one movie I instantly thought of, and it's not from the director of any of your four favorites. It doesn't even have that much in common with these movies, and it got terrible reviews, but it just felt so perfect for you. Turns out you already saw it, so it isn't one of my recommendations. But I'm curious to see if anyone can guess which movie it was. I feel like my intuition was correct though, because you gave the movie 4.5 stars and clicked the like button. But anyway, moving on to the movies you didn't have marked as watched that I want to recommend. When I was looking through my list of movies I wrote down, I realized I wrote down Last Year at Marienbad 3 times, so I guess that's my top choice for you. I've recommended this movie to people with Lynch and Kubrick films in their favorites before, although usually I compare this one to Mulholland Drive and The Shining. But I feel like this movie was highly influential for a lot of filmmakers, especially Lynch and Kubrick. It has a dreamlike atmosphere, it's disorienting, and it raises more questions than it answers, like Twin Peaks: The Return and Eyes Wide Shut. There are moments in The Beast that remind me a lot of this movie stylistically, and like The Beast, this movie involves a man and a woman who may or may not have met before and may or may not have shared a past together. Speaking of highly influential films, there are 3 very influential short films that I think perfectly encapsulate almost all of the themes and the overall vibe of your favorites, and those are La Jetée, Un Chien Andalou, and Meshes of the Afternoon. Possession has a lot in common with your favorites, but some of those similarities are spoilers, so I'll just say that it's surreal like Twin Peaks: The Return, its depiction of romantic relationships is fascinating and thought-provoking like The Beast, it has this underlying sense of paranoia like Eyes Wide Shut, and it's a psychological horror film like Cure. Beyond the Black Rainbow is surreal like Twin Peaks: The Return. Like The Beast, it's science fiction and involves trying to repress and control emotions. Like Eyes Wide Shut, it involves a cult-like organization, and like Cure, it's a horror film about control. Second is science fiction like The Beast and horror like Cure. It involves a character assuming a new identity, kind of like the fractured identities of Cooper in The Return. And like Eyes Wide Shut, the protagonist finds himself involved with a sort of secret society. I also think you should check out Memento. Like Twin Peaks: The Return, this movie is about memory and identity and has a non-linear, fragmented story structure. And the protagonist used to have a job in the insurance industry like Dougie Jones. It shifts between multiple timelines like The Beast. Like Eyes Wide Shut, the protagonist is questioning his reality. And like Cure, the protagonist is investigating a murder. Annihilation is science fiction like The Beast, horror like Cure, and explores some of the themes that are in Twin Peaks: The Return and Eyes Wide Shut. Possessor is sci-fi like The Beast, plays with the concept of identity like Twin Peaks, and like Cure, it's a horror film where someone is able to control someone else in some way and get them to kill. A Different Man also explores themes related to identity, and someone wears a mask during sex like in Eyes Wide Shut. This is the part where someone comments and says, "My recommendations are based on trivial connections," because obviously I think you just love movies where people wear masks during sex because you like Eyes Wide Shut. Coincidentally, another movie I was planning on recommending also involves someone wearing a mask during sex, and that's The Face of Another. But the real reason why I'm recommending this one is because it fits the vibe and delves into a lot of the same themes as your favorites. Since Twin Peaks is technically a TV show, even though David Lynch considered The Return a film, I feel like I should throw in a couple TV shows as well, since The Return is a continuation of the original series. But I'm only including ones that are on Letterboxd. I don't know if others will agree with me on this, but I think Paranoia Agent is the Twin Peaks of anime. Before Twin Peaks: The Return existed, I would have described Wild Palms as Twin Peaks if it starred Jim Belushi. But then Jim Belushi ended up being in The Return. Too Old to Die Young also has a dark, surreal atmosphere to it, like The Return. While I'm on the topic of TV, when I saw The Beast, there were aspects of it that reminded me of the Hang the DJ episode of Black Mirror. And since Black Mirror is an anthology series, you don't have to watch any of the other episodes, although I did check your Letterboxd and you logged 2 episodes from the most recent season. And I thought the last season was the weakest one, so please don't let that deter you from watching this episode. Switching back to movies, if your favorite part of The Return is Dougie Jones, then I think you might enjoy Playtime, or Monsieur Hulot's Holiday, which is one of the movies David Lynch said exemplifies perfect filmmaking in his book Catching the Big Fish. Speaking of which, 8.5 was one of David Lynch's favorite movies. And one more that he praised in his book that I was going to recommend to you anyway is Rear Window, which has a voyeuristic vibe like Eyes Wide Shut and involves investigating a potential murder like Cure. Peeping Tom also has that voyeuristic feeling, and it's about a serial killer like Cure. It also explores trauma trauma and the cycle of abuse, like Twin Peaks: The Return. Speaking of voyeurism and trauma, I also want to recommend Sisters, which, like Twin Peaks: The Return, involves two characters that look alike and are played by the same person, but have very different personalities. And like here, it's a horror film about a killer. A couple movies involving police detectives that I think you might like since you like Cure are Fireworks and Zodiac. I also want to throw in a few wild cards. This one doesn't really fit the vibe, but since you're clearly a big fan of David Lynch and already saw his movies, I think you might enjoy Lucky. Since doppelgangers are a pretty big part of Twin Peaks: The Return and Cure was directed by Kiyoshi Kurosawa and stars Koji Yakusho, I think you should check out Doppelganger, which was also directed by Kiyoshi Kurosawa and stars Koji Yakusho in multiple roles. I feel like RoboCop doesn't really fit since it's an action movie, but it is sci-fi that deals with artificial intelligence like the Beast. The protagonist wakes up with no memory of his former life, like when Cooper is Dougie in The Return, and the actors who play Albert and Leland in Twin Peaks are in this movie.